Officially welcome everyone. I'm so thankful you're here. I'm Todd Ferguson. I'm the director of the Religion and Public Life Center here at the Boniuk Institute at Rice. And so we are excited to have Elaine Howard Ecklund here today, who's hosting as well.
Yes.
And so like doing all the duties. But I am so excited. So many of y'all know her and love her, and her work is just phenomenal. And so I'm going to officially introduce her with her official bio. No, come back. With her official bio. But let me say this more personally. Like, so many of you know her. You've worked with her, or you've been to other events. Y'all, she's a big deal. Like, especially in my world of sociology of religion. She's it. She's one of our leading scholars. And she is so gracious enough to have us in her home. So thank you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Like, that is your gift of like hospitality shines through. So here's the official introduction now. So Elaine Howard Ecklund is a sociologist, an author, and a leader who explores how individuals and groups bring their deepest values, especially religious and ethical commitments, into their work, their leadership, and their public lives. She holds the Herbert S. Audrey Chair in Social Sciences at Rice, where she's a professor of sociology, and then, as we know, directs the Boniuk Institute for the study and advancement of religious tolerance. This next part's amazing. She has published 9 books and over 150 academic articles.
With colleagues.
Absolutely. And she's led nearly 20 national and international research projects on religion, science, institutional culture, and workplace religious diversity. Her work is widely recognized for revealing how religious pluralism, when understood and supported, can be an asset rather than a liability. She is known for building interdisciplinary teams and convening global gatherings like the one that you had in Paris this spring. And she brings clarity to topics that are often burdened by division rather than dialogue. So her current work, and this is where we're going to get to hear her about her new book, which you have in your hands, focuses on religious diversity in the workplace. And so she has 2 books on this topic. One is Religion in a Changing Workplace by Oxford University Press from last year, and then today's Working for Better from InterVarsity Press. So one is written for an academic audience, and then this one is for an everybody audience, and particularly a Christian audience. So Dr. Ecklund received her PhD from Cornell, where she was the recipient of the Graduate Student Baccalaureate Award for Academic Excellence and Community Service. And then in 2018, she gave the Gifford Lectures at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And then in 2023, received the Rice University Presidential Mentoring Award. I taught all morning and my voice is about to go. She founded the Religion and Public Life program at Rice in 2010 and served as the director for 12 years. And then she was president of the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion and the president of the Religious Research Association. And that's really where I first got to know you, because she was president of my 2 societies. And if you ever want to know more about her, other than seeing her around Houston or going to her office, she has a website, ElaineHowardEcklund.com. So let's welcome her into her own home.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Todd. That's such a generous introduction. Wow.
Thank you.
Kind of embarrassing to hear.
Yeah, not at all. So this book, and you have it here, and if you did not get a copy, we have it up front. So thank you for your generosity of sharing the book with everyone. So it's about faith and work. It's about how we think about that. And often when we think about faith and work, people assume, this is about either sharing your faith, proselytization, or discrimination. or it's about calling, like, oh, I'm called to my work, I'm called to be a religious worker. But you and Denise, I want to give Denise
that's right.
full,
Yeah,
like they're co-authors.
Yeah, that's right.
But y'all shift that conversation. So
yeah.
so could you explain how you're trying to take these traditional ideas of faith and work and shift them?
Yeah, thanks for asking that question. So this book, Working for Better, A New Approach to Faith at Work, was born in part out of the other book that we did last year. And you may think we worked really fast to have two books come out back to back like that. One book was very slow and one book was very fast, so that just sort of happened. But in our other project, we found that it was really the Christians who were, I would say, concerned, had a lot of anxiety about how to bring their faith to work appropriately in what is increasingly a very pluralistic environment in most modern workplaces. So people are the most likely to meet those who are not like them religiously in their workplaces. We really don't go anyplace else where we meet very many people who are like us. It's really not in our religious organizations that we're going to meet people from other religious traditions. We often send our kids to schools that are like us. We're part of civic organizations. We're not very much part of civic organizations anymore, but if we are, they're often with people who are like us. And so workplaces are one of these, what we might call a kind of bastion of diversity, although in different kinds of ways. And the Christians we talked to in our first portion of our study were very concerned about this and how to be thoughtful. When we talked to workplace leaders, they were concerned about Christians. When you start talking about faith at work, they immediately went to, oh my gosh, we're going to have all these Christians proselytizing. It's going to be a huge problem for our workplace, lead to division. And so because of these kinds of sensibilities, Denise and I thought, wow, what we really need is a book that's about a thoughtful Christian pluralism, a thoughtful Christian approach to pluralism, that really honors everyone as being made in the image of God and approaches these topics from a standpoint of humility. So this book is quite different than other ones I've written in that it uses data, so that piece is not different. All my books have been very much data-based, but it also tells a lot of my own personal story as a Christian, how I've navigated some of these things working in a religious environment at Rice University, that it's not a faith-based school in any way, and what it's been like for me. Denise is coming from a very different environment, Wheaton College, which is a Christian college, and so the two of us together writing this book was a really unique and fun experience. And just having the chance to tell our stories in the midst of also putting forth what we hope is a great data collection, and then doing a bit of theological reflection too, so that we could really attract pastors and Christians, everyday Christians in actual congregations to the book.
Yeah, I thought y'all did a good job of sharing your perspective. So you coming from Rice, Denise coming from Wheaton, absolutely, totally different contexts.
Very different. I was just in Wheaton like last week actually, and I was like, whoa, totally different context. I just sort of, I called my husband and I was like, oh my gosh, people like talk about religion so much here, like so openly, and he's like, yeah, it's a Christian college. I know, but it's still kind of like something different when you experience it.
Absolutely, yeah. And so yeah, you weave in these beautiful personal stories, and I appreciated that vulnerability in that. You weave in theological reflection. So you had to take off your sociologist hat and put on your personal Christianity hat. But then you also weave in massive amounts of data. So could you talk about, like, how did y'all collect the data? How did you get your information?
Yeah, so we did two big studies that contributed to this book. So we started collecting data from a national survey, US-based data, of really a general population sample with over samples of people who are Jewish, people who are Muslim, and people who are non-religious. Those are the three largest minority traditions in the US, and we don't really think of non-religious people as being part of a tradition. They're part of different kinds of traditions, but we wanted to make sure those folks were in our study in large enough numbers that we could say meaningful things about them. And then the pandemic happened, and that kind of shut down some of our data collection. We had one survey done at that point about Towards the end of the pandemic, we had additional funding to do another national survey of those same groups and try to do a little bit of an assessment of how things changed as a result of the pandemic. We also collected about 300 interviews with people who are part of religious organizations. So we wanted to collect interviews with folks who actually are thinking about these things in a meaningful way. So our interview data collection was a little bit different than our survey data collection. Then we went to U.S. cities, 4 cities that we thought are pretty representative of the United States, and we did focus groups with folks in those cities, workers. That was a really fun process. We actually recruited people like Facebook Marketplace. So it was very interesting. It was really fun, but also kind of overwhelming. You got a very wide diversity of people. And then we did some focus groups with pastors as well, because we knew at a certain point, by that point in the data collection, we knew that we were finding some unique things about Christians, and so we wanted to make sure that pastoral audience was part of that as well.
Wow. I mean, it was that's a massive amount of data. I was looking at your sample size for your survey, and it was, what, 13,000?
Yes.
And
Yep.
most national surveys are around 1,500 to 2,000, and so when I saw this sample size, like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
that's amazing. And often with books that are coming from a faith perspective, it's usually a religious leader sharing their own opinions or their viewpoints. And I love the idea that, like, you're backing it up with massive amounts of data. And so it's not just what's my opinion, it's let me show you how people are actually responding. We surveyed them, we talked to them multiple times through interviews or focus groups, and so I really appreciate that.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And in the book, you set it up in terms of like pairs or twins of topics. And so one of the topics that they twin is discrimination. And so you take discrimination, so this idea of religious discrimination, but then you pair it with the idea of protection.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain that for people who
Yeah,
not read the book
yeah.
or going to read a book in the future?
So I hope you do read it in the future. So we have these tensions in the book, and it's the subtitle of the book is A New Approach to Faith at Work. So we're describing in the first part of the pairing something that we used to think about faith in the workplace with something that we're needing to think about given our current demographic realities and sort of a change that's going on. There has been quite a bit written about how Christians feel discriminated against in certain kinds of workplaces. I do think some of that literature is very accurate. I do think there's room and places where Christians are discriminated against. But what we talk about in this book is that actually, if we have a theological perspective that recognizes everyone is created in the image of God from a Christian perspective, that we also, as Christians, especially when we're Christian leaders and have power in situations, we will be particularly concerned about the rights and the welfare of others who are not Christians as living out of our Christian sensibility. And so we talk about, what does it mean to work against anti-Semitism? What does it mean for Christians to be concerned about Islamophobia? What does it mean for Christians to be concerned about the non-religious? And how it's not just that we have like a little concern, it's that we ought to be very concerned about all of these people who are also, from a Christian standpoint, again, part of the Imago Dei or made in the image of God. So that chapter pairing has been quite controversial to some, I should say.
Really?
Yeah. So
Can you say more about that?
We've now presented this material at several different Christian colleges and universities and at other kinds of institutions and community groups. We've done about, I think, 11 talks on the book so far, even though it's only been out a month. We've been doing a lot of online speaking, and I've traveled 3 places to give talks. I think it's hard for certain Christians to take in. I think that in our Christian communities, we talk a lot about ways in which we feel marginalized in the broader society. And I know those of you, some in this room, who are great scholars of things like Christian nationalism and other kinds of movements that are happening within Christianity, know that some of this is based in a spirit of feeling like, gosh, I'm pretty marginalized in society. So when we come alongside and say, like, yes, you're somewhat marginalized, but these folks are marginalized even more, that feels to some like a kind of critique. And so we've had to approach that very sensitively, and it's been, I think, really interesting to talk about those kinds of issues. Yeah.
Wow. And so related to that, y'all present this idea of principled pluralism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the last chapter. The last chapter is about rest and like taking breaks, but I felt like that was almost like the pinnacle of the book in terms of like everything you were building up to, proposing this idea of principled pluralism. And it takes an approach that I appreciated, especially with like the Religion and Public Life Center, where you don't boil down every religious tradition to the common denominator. Everyone stands firm in their religious faith, but at the same time allows people to practice their own faith. So could you say more about that and how that impacts leaders, like either workplace leaders or congregational leaders? So what is this idea of principled pluralism?
Yeah. So there's a lot of fear among workplace leaders. I was just speaking to the Rice Society of University Women this afternoon, and we talked on and on about this. So there's fear that if we allow expression of faith in the workplace, that everyone will start proselytizing, because by far the largest religious group in the United States are Christians. Many of those Christians see proselytizing or sharing their faith with others as actually part of what they need to do. So workplace leaders are very concerned, like if this is going to open up something, it's like we let it out of Pandora's box, and then people are going to become incredibly offended. There's going to be conflict in my workplace. That's not really happening that much. Actually, the evangelical Christians that we interviewed for our study found it very, very hard to share about their faith. They are very concerned about what others will think of them, and they expressed to us that they want some kind of alternative way, which is how we came up with this idea of principled pluralism. It's taken from several other authors as well, but applied in a very particular way that we pioneer. And what we mean by principled pluralism is that Christians ought to stay convicted in what they think. That's the principle part. So it's very much not boiling things down to a lowest common denominator, as you said, Todd, making it seem like all of our religious traditions are the same. And we don't want that for others either. So we don't want, in a principled pluralism approach, people of other faith traditions to feel like they have to pretend that they are the same as us or boil things down to the lowest common denominator. The other way in which our principled pluralism approach is principled is that because we know that every person is made in the image of God, then every person potentially has some kind of God image to teach us from. So that's a kind of heavy theological concept. But in effect, it just means we're walking around the world as Christians with a sense of humility, a sense of both intellectual and personal humility. So we're not just interacting with people of other faiths so that we can then share our faith with them. We're also interacting with them so that we really learn from them, because we know that there's a great possibility that they have something to teach us. So our standpoint in approaching others is very different than the just I'm going to proselytize to everyone I meet kind of standpoint. It's still being authentic about one's faith, but it's recognizing, that we want to make sure there's space for others to be authentic about their faith as well. And we want to be part of creating workplace environments where everyone is really honored and all of their traditions or lack thereof are honored. And we want to make sure that we have this standpoint of intellectual humility. And that's what we mean by principled pluralism. I would say you're touching on the two chapters that bring the most controversy.
Wow.
So it's fun that you linked into those.
Those are
Those are my favorite too as a sociologist. Again, folks have kind of pushed back on this, some, but and the folks did today, or Kate was there with me. We had a really rousing conversation. And so it's hard for people sometimes because they just are so concerned about offense. And I will say that's not what's happening in most workplaces. It's not the case that so many people are talking about their religions that everyone's offended by each other all the time. That's just not a very common occurrence. We sometimes hear about it, very public occurrences, and then it makes it seem as if this is happening to everyone, but that's not really what's happening. really people are wanting to be authentic about their faith at work and just don't know how to be in a way that honors other people in their workplaces.
Right. So that leads us to like this idea of the working lives of people under our care. So many of you are leaders, whether it's congregational leaders, civic leaders, organizational leaders. And so how can leaders help those under their care in their working lives, whether you're working with people at their workplace or you're leading a congregation and then those people go out into their workplace? How can leaders here help those under their care really think about work and faith in that connection?
Yeah, those are a great set of questions. So I have a slightly different answer for pastors than I do for other kinds of workplace leaders. So pastors have a very particular role, and leaders of other traditions. This book is written primarily for a Christian audience, but I think this would be the same kind of thing if I were talking to a rabbi or an imam. And they have under their care folks that they are trying to pass their faith tradition on to and help their congregants grow in that particular faith tradition. And so they want to have a situation where there's lots of opportunities for people to grow. So I would argue that helping people know how to interact with others in their workplaces should be part of the growth model for all congregational leaders. Because for those of us who work, we spend the majority of our waking hours in our workplace. We often spend, we know this, some of us, especially academics, know you identify with me, we often spend much more time at work than we do sleeping, much more time at work than we do with our families. And so our workplace is a primary area where we can really be growing in how we integrate our faith and life. As a leader of an organization that's not specifically faith-based, then those leaders have a different kind of standard because they necessarily are going to be working with people for different traditions. And so if you're, say, a Christian leader who is in an organization that is not just composed of Christians, there needs to be a kind of integrity in how you treat everyone in that organization. That, again, coming back to that core theological Imago Dei principle, you cannot treat Christians in differential ways or better than you treat other people in the workplace because, say, you have more in common with them or something. So that's not appropriate. That's not part of the integrity of being a leader in a mixed organization where essentially a pluralistic organization. But I think there are things that you can do as a leader in an organization to give folks opportunities to accommodate their religious traditions. We talk about principled kind of accommodation to accommodate Christian traditions, but accommodate really all traditions, and not give preferential treatment to people who are religious or people who are not religious. So that becomes a complex topic sometimes. And then the principles of calling, we were really surprised at the extent to which people of all traditions want to experience this calling to their work. Even people who are not religious. We often think of calling as a very religious concept that was in part birthed through Judeo-Christian faith traditions. But actually people who are not religious also want to feel called to their work. So giving people chances to really feel called to their work, to live robust work lives that exercise their gifts, I think it's very important.
Yeah.
I'm giving little speeches to all of the questions that you're asking.
I love this.
This is so professorial. This is something we just cannot turn off. It's like we can never, I don't know what we do to give like a one sentence answer.
I know.
It's just like it's trained into us now.
I know. Journalists hate us.
Yes, thank you. And then we start every conversation with like, it's nuanced.
It's nuanced.
Yeah, it's
right.
nuanced. They hate that.
Speaking of nuance, since you have your book, I'm going to invite you to turn to page 34. Okay? I'm going to be a professor for a little bit. So, Elaine and Denise do a really good job of categorizing how people were thinking of calling. And so there's this really good visual about how people, the 4 ways people think about their calling to their work. So could you explain or walk us through this visual? I felt it was so helpful.
Oh, thank you. And I want to give credit to Denise who created that visual.
Okay.
So she's
You're not the
her
graphic
mind,
designer.
her mind works that way, and I was really fun. I was like, oh my gosh, that's totally what I was trying to say with my words, and she's like, it was great. It was a really fun time. So here's just some ways of understanding calling. One of the things we wanted to do is broaden that concept of calling, so people just had various ways that they could understand their work as calling, and to give them just some more principles to catch on to, so they didn't see it in a narrow way, so a larger proportion of people can see their work as calling. So we understand calling as being intrinsic on two axes, intrinsic to the work itself, so that's the horizontal axis, or extrinsic to the work itself. We see calling also as being primarily within the workplace or beyond the workplace in terms of location of service. So if you're going around our four quadrants here, if you start with work as a means of serving outside of work, that's which was really fun. So we talked with a guy who's works at Subway, and he feels like his work is a calling, but it's not really to the people who are actually in the workplace with him. He's very proud that Subway has an alternative model for fast food where he can provide people with healthy food outside the organization, and he can use his gifts that he's working on inside the organization to provide for people outside the organization. Another one that I think I'll just give one more example. There is a sense where work is a means of serving at work, but extrinsic to the nature of the work itself. So we talked with a fellow who worked at a meat packing plant, and he was a really fun person to interview. The other people at the plant called him Yoda because he's just so helpful. He's kind of like an informal counselor at the work. He's helped several folks with their marriages and given all kinds of informal help. So his calling is to those people in the workplace. He's helping the people at work, but he's helping them about things which really have nothing to do with the work itself. So he never mentioned once that he feels like the actual packing of the meat is something that he's called to. He hopes very much to get out of that job. But when he's there, he sees himself as called because he's helping all of these people. So I always thought of calling, before I did this research, as this linear kind of thing, where you like have this word, from God, and then you go directly towards that work. But what I saw from doing this work with Denise is that actually people often realize the nature of the calling after they're already in the work. And they start to see, they're like, oh, that's right, I see now that I was called and that I'm being used in particular ways. And so we're hoping that the kind of schematic that we give here just opens up the variety of ways that people can feel called. I will say there's a downside to calling, which after people reflect on it and they start to feel called, often, this is what we call the double-edged sword of calling, they feel like if the workplace is difficult, they should overlook that difficulty. Or they feel like if they're being discriminated against, they're less likely to report discrimination if they feel called to their work. They feel that other people should suck it up as well if the workplace, it's sorry to be so pejorative, but one of our respondents used that term. I feel other people should suck it up because this is a great workplace and I feel called to it. I'm like, wow, okay. And so there is this downside of calling that we often don't talk about very much, where people are just less likely to complain, less likely especially to report acts of discrimination, which can mean that workplaces remain unjust.
Yeah, wow, thank you. And yeah, other studies have shown like once you label something as a calling, you can pay them less.
You can pay them less.
Because
We talk about
it's a
that as
calling.
well.
So like
That's
teaching,
right.
social work, ministry, why should we pay the pastor? It's a calling.
That's right.
Yeah?
That's right.
Oh my gosh. So the theme of this semester for this year for our gatherings is leading in the midst of change. So many of you are leading organizations and things are radically changing. It seems like every month things are changing. So what do you see as the future, or where are things changing in that intersection between faith and work? What should we be looking out for?
Yeah. So I have two kinds of answers. Demographically, things are really changing. So younger people have very different ideas about work and what it means to do good work and how much of themselves they should bring to work than older people do. And that often happens, but we are seeing a generation now of workers who've very much been raised in particular kinds of technologies, so there's this sort of potential downside to it, want things to happen faster, want answers to come quicker. But we're also seeing that those folks are much better at those technologies than the people who are leading them, and so may be put in a position of leadership in those particular spaces very early on because they just know much more about the particular kinds of technologies that we're needing to use in the workplace. Our economy is becoming more and more unequal between knowledge workers and people who are not knowledge workers. So there's all kinds of demographic changes happen. And from a ministry context, pastors and other kinds of religious leaders are needing to adapt their approach to faith at work to a very rapidly changing workplace context. And so there's really not, I think, even less room than there has been in the past to say, well, calling is only for certain types of work. If you're in professional ministry or you're in a ministry-like occupation, like social work or teaching where you work with people, we need to have a lot more creativity as leaders in terms of how we can see calling play out. Like, what would it mean to be a lawyer and to feel a sense of calling to that kind of work? We talked to a fellow who worked at the back end in finance at a hospital. And it was very funny, like people could never see in our study how if you worked with numbers, that could be a spiritual calling. And he was quite high up in this hospital he worked in, and he's like, oh, I know the doctors, they're called to their work clearly. The nurses, they're called to their work, they're helping patients. What do? I'm just the person who designed the record-keeping system for the hospital. And anyone who's been part of the medical system, all of us, know that if records are not kept well, if things are lost, if they're not decipherable, if they're not transferred between institutions, that it's absolute chaos. Right. And so that to me seemed like an incredibly honorable profession that one could feel called to, but he just couldn't see it. And so I think that's a matter of how religious leaders potentially talk about different, I don't want to put all the blame on religious leaders, but how we as communities of faith talk about things in our communities and what kinds of work seems more honorable and what kinds of work seem less so. Wow. So we need to have, the question was about change, and we need to have a kind of flexible model of how our work can be viewed as sacred and how we can feel called to it, of a model that works with different kinds of employment, that works not just for people who are professionals, but for people also who are working class, for people who don't feel like they like their jobs, for people who love their jobs, for people who are unemployed. And we're seeing all of these kinds of things happening in our society in greater and greater numbers. And so it's going to take a lot of creativity to see those different kinds of workplace contexts as having the potential to be sacred.
And it sounds like a big part of that is coming from leaders who are starting that conversation with those in their care.
It does, but we're also seeing more grassroots kind of movement. So some of you may know that actually some universities and led by corporations were at the forefront of this, are putting together employee resource groups. So it might be a soccer group at Facebook or something, a tech company. But I need another example because Facebook, my younger friends tell me is not what we're using for sure. So I need another example. But I did visit the Facebook headquarters once and to talk to an employee resource group. They're not the soccer one. I do not have latent talents as a soccer player. But I was talking to the faith-based one, and more faith-based employee resource groups are cropping up, and specifically for Christians, but also for people who are Muslim and for Jews. And so those kind of environments are much more grassroots level, and so I'm waiting to see what's going to happen when more of those kinds of things crop up, if there will be new models.
Yeah, my wife's a veterinarian, and she's part of it's called DVM Christian Moms, and so it's people with the Doctor of Veterinary Medicine degree who are moms and Christians. And
Oh,
it's
I
through,
love that.
It's through social media.
Yeah.
And so it's allowed them to have an international conversation.
Wow, that's really neat.
So what I want to do now is I actually want us, before we open it up to Q&A, I want us as a community to have smaller conversations where I want you to get with your neighbors and talk about what's your experience like with having these conversations about the intersection of faith and work. So if that means you're a leader, either congregational or civic leader, or you're over a community, what are the people under your care talking about with their work lives? Or if you're a worker, what's it like at your workplace in terms of faith and work? So get in groups of 3 or so. If you don't know each other, briefly introduce yourselves, make a new friend. And if you do know them, well, get to know them even better. But we're going to take about 4 or 5 minutes, have these little pocket conversations, and then we're going to open it up for a larger group conversation.
Oh, I like that. I like that, the theology of place, where you can be used in any kind of place where you feel like God has called you to.
Yes.
I would want to make sure that people understand that that's a very broad notion. So there were people in our study who did somewhat what I would think of, this is a pejorative word, but very difficult work that could be very boring and even didn't fully, I think there were cases where this work did not fully honor their humanity, if that makes sense, where that occupation should change so that it would more fully honor the workers, people who worked in fast food and service industries, people who worked in cleaning industries where they were expected to just clean all day with hardly any breaks. But even in those occupations, we still found people who saw the particular work itself as a calling and were able to reframe the work as a calling. There was one woman who did terribly difficult work in a hospital, cleaning up all kinds of horrific things. But she felt very strongly that she was called to this hospital and that her work was very sacred, because when a surgeon came in to work in that particular environment, it was her job to sign off on an absolutely clean environment. And she said that's like, there's nothing more important like making sure that people do not get infections because I have cleaned this place. Now, should she complain if there's unjust working conditions, or should someone complain on her behalf? I think that also might be part of calling and thinking. We have a chapter about systemic change in the book, and it was very hard for Christians to think in terms of systems or changing systems to be more just. And I think there's a lot of room for more creative thinking along that plane as well. So there is a sense where we can help others find work that matches their gifts and that they feel, through which they feel they have a special impact on the world. So that's how most people see calling. But most of us do not find that. So only 20% of the people in our sample, a little over 20%, actually saw their work as a calling. It was not really our job as interviewers to contradict what they said at all. That's not what you really do in a research interview. But it has been wonderful to talk through these ideas with people. And we have, at the end of each chapter, we have discussion questions so people can discuss these chapters in a group, or like a book reading group if they wanted to, or a small group. And we do give lots of questions that sort of guide you to thinking through sets of things you might want to if you feel like you're in the wrong job, or you feel like you need to be in a different kind of career or place, or something that really exercises your gifts more. But I love the finding too that there are lots of ways, or like particularistic kinds of ways of feeling a sense of calling in a workplace. Even if the whole job does not feel like your ultimate calling, there are aspects of things that can be uncovered. I like what, bringing this together with what Angela just said. Like, in this place, if I'm there, then there can be things that I'm realizing that are spiritual, that ways in which I'm serving others that need a sense of calling, even if I don't exactly want to be in this job. So I think there's ways in which, if you don't abuse that notion, that doesn't mean you should never complain about unjust work, that there's ways in which you can kind of open up and experience more through the work that you're in. Yeah, so there's two kinds of concepts in the book when we've spoken to, this is right here is a mixed religious audience, but when we've spoken to specifically Christian audiences about this material, there is a group of Christians in American society who do feel they're very discriminated against right now. And so when in our book, we acknowledge that and talk about the extent to which that happens, but then we put the emphasis on Christians because they're the majority group in American society, spending more energy thinking about how they can be protectors of others who are experiencing even more discrimination. And so that idea sometimes doesn't feel as if it's acknowledging Christian discrimination enough. So that's
Christians are being discriminated against. That's
the other thing that certain Christian audiences push back on is this idea of pluralism. Pluralism is seen as being a negative thing, sort of full stop in certain kinds of Christian circles. Probably not among the folks gathered in this room, but we've presented this material already to quite a wide variety of audiences.
They need to hear more about the Boniuk Institute.
Yeah, they do. And one of the Christian audiences that I presented it to, the person called me out and had looked up the Boniuk Institute and said, I see that that's not a specifically Christian thing. How can you be? She said this from the audience, so it's very interesting. How can you be leading that if you're a Christian? Mm-hmm. So it was really an interesting chance to talk about that and how I see that as a very particular kind of calling I have right now. And it was kind of fun to enact some of the themes in the book, right there in front of a live audience. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that some of these are majority-minority dynamics. So in the U.S., whether or not we like to believe this is true, Christians are by far the numeric majority. Mm-hmm. And so that especially evangelical Christians are the largest group of Christians. If we merge all Christians together, from all the denominations plus evangelical, they're bigger than Catholics, but Catholics are a sizable group in the U.S. as well. So Protestant Christians, I should have said. In France, that is not the case. So as you know, the church participation is very, very low. There certainly are a lot of state holidays that are religiously framed. When I lived, I've laughed about this. When I lived in France for a year and sent my daughter there just to a local town school, I'm having been raised in Christian tradition, I didn't know some of these holidays. And we had them off. They were like the kids, you turn your head and they're off for another week. It was just really something to really take advantage of that. But that doesn't mean that religion is showing up at workplaces. There is a sign in the public, what we think of as the public school, that says that no religious symbols should be worn. People should not talk about religion. That teachers, there's gone through certain periods where teachers are to take, if girls wear a hijab, are to take off the hijab from people who are wearing it. And so there is a very different approach to religion under a French context. I'm telling this to someone who's actually from France, so hopefully you agree with what I'm saying. So that's a very different kind of church-state relation than we have in the U.S. Yeah, in our other book, Religion in a Changing Workplace, we have a chapter that's called Fear. And we talked about the different kinds of things that people are afraid of when it comes to talking about or enacting religion in the workplace. And one of the things that people are afraid of related to pluralism is that it will somehow undermine the conviction of faith. So that as soon as you start interacting in a pluralistic environment and listening to what someone else who's part of another religious tradition or not part of a tradition at all, there's a very significant group of people in the U.S. who are not part of a religious tradition now, that somehow this will undermine your faith. There's never the possibility that maybe those kind of conversations would actually strengthen your faith, that you would think like, oh, I learned a bit more about what I thought by having to explain it to someone else. Or maybe it would change your faith and you would say, like, what this other person is asking me is somehow changing me a bit in a positive way. So the change was generally framed as being negative, so that pluralism would have a negative impact on faith conviction. We did not find that to be the case. That actually we have some lovely examples where Muslims and Christians were interacting in these interfaith groups over lunches and just talking and sharing their sacred scriptures with one another. And those were generally, this doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's generally a pretty positive experience.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you, Elaine.
Oh,
thank you for
you.
sharing this book. Thank you for hosting us. Can we give her a round of applause?